how many ant colonies do you have?
Around 3,000 ant colonies currently, right?
What?
Ants? People keep ants?
It's also a good introduction to the ladies. Welcome, everyone. I'm Cole from Cole's Ants, and today we're going to be trying something a little different. Ant keepers and ant enthusiasts are kind of a growing hobby. Still very niche, but growing. And it's a nice community, a colony, if you will. And that colony must grow.
The colony must grow, yes, the colony must grow.
Because the hobby of ant keeping is just really fascinating. And I love telling stories and bringing them to life, entertaining the people that just like watching ants, and educating the people that want to keep ants. So today, we're going to be talking about the hobby of ant keeping.
The hobby of ant keeping, la 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 la.
And to talk about this topic with me is my friend Nami, who turned his hobby actually into a business. He co-founded a site called Antlantis, where he actually sells ants. So, hey Nami.
Hi everyone. Yeah, no, in the last year or so, I decided with the help of my business partner Michael that I wanted to build a platform allowing people to not only just get healthy ant colonies, but continue growing their ant colonies that they purchase from us. So that's the vision that I see Atlantis being.
First question for both of us is, how did we get into ant keeping?
If I'm talking just about myself, I mean, I've always been fascinated with animals and the outdoors as a whole. And growing up, I just remember myself playing out in the grass and in the dirt and in between the leaf litter. Ants for me almost was like a game of Pokemon. You know, when I first started keeping ants, it's, I went outside, I found one, and then that one turned into two, and then into three. And it was really just a gateway for me to explore my passion in nature.
They're fun to watch, too. It's like a fish tank, but they're busy little creatures.
Great visual pet.
Yeah, well, for me, I've also always been an animal lover and kind of a science nut too, so I just love watching animal videos on YouTube. Then one day I stumbled upon Ants Canada, which I'm sure a lot of you watch Ants Canada as well. And I noticed he was just a really good storyteller. You would watch his videos on like the Phoenix Empire growing, and they were just really engaging and fun to watch. And I thought, this is super cool. And as I started to learn more, I went deep down this rabbit hole of ants and learning a lot about ants, and then getting my own ant queen and started making videos as a creative outlet, kind of found a spot there. Talking about the hobby of ant keeping, let's kind of get into that a little bit. Kind of started in like the 1950s, right? With the Uncle Milton ant farms.
Yeah, it definitely did. That's kind of the first thing that comes into their head. They say, I had a little ant farm when I was a kid. I was going to say there's no age requirement for ant keeping. I mean, I'll say that I started when I was ant keeping when I was 10, 11 years old. And I mean, I vended shows. And I've seen people of all ages come and purchase ants. When I first initially started vending at shows, I personally thought that my audience would be younger kids. And I honestly would sit here and say that that's not the case. I mean, I've had all ages come in and try to purchase ants and or keep ants, or have mentioned that they've kept ants. So I don't think there really is an age requirement.
It's not just a kid's thing anymore to have a little ant farm. Like, it really is an everyone thing.
And like we mentioned, the hobby of ant keeping as a whole is still growing, right? So there's so much more insight and information that's to be learned. So I think that's kind of what makes ant keeping so great.
So one thing that I've learned in my first year of ant keeping is that there's a lot to learn, right? So what are some things, Nami, that you've kind of grown in and your understanding of this hobby?
One of the things I can urge the audience who keep ants as a whole is to have patience, right? Ant keeping is not one of those things where I think you can just kind of jump into and have success right off the rip. I mean, God, if I had to go back and look at all the colonies that I perhaps had to go through before I had my first ever successful colony, some ants grow slowly, right? And it's not like something that you can just look at where you can notice change right away, right? So if you don't really have patience, you'll kind of get stuck in this loop where you feel like nothing is happening.
I've definitely noticed that too. There's a deep satisfaction that comes with it, but it requires a lot of patience and a lot of observation and trial and error. I think one thing, as we talk about the growth of the hobby of ant keeping, there's a lot more resources now, right? There's all kinds of stuff on Reddit and online, and care sheets and care guides and videos that people are kind of filling in the knowledge gaps.
I can definitely see where you're coming from. I mean, yeah, when I first started, in terms of resources, there wasn't a lot of sharing going on. I think now that the hobby's grown, there's more platforms, whether it's YouTube, there's Formiculture, or other forums, right? Or Discord for that matter, right? Where people are able to kind of share their experiences, right? And I think that as a whole has allowed the hobby to really grow as well.
Let's talk about people that have helped shape the ant community. We talked about Ants Canada, who really had a big influence. Around 2011, just the search terms for ant farm or ant keeping just shot way up for some reason. So something happened in 2011, and I think Ants Canada probably played a part in that.
When I look back right now, 2010, 2011 was around when I first started keeping ants. Around 2010, 2011, it really took off. In terms of other notable key figures, I mean, I think Drew from Formiculture kind of allowed another platform to grow, and I think it brought a lot of the community together. I think Ants Canada himself had a forums as well, that I think still exists today, but I think all these things slowly but surely brought upon a community.
When it comes to YouTube and kind of ant influencers, I guess, obviously Ants Canada, but then there's also Ants Hollifer, Lights Camera Ants.
I think one of the first YouTube channels that I remember getting me into ants was Antimidation. I don't even think this guy's around anymore, but I think the overall premise of ant keeping as a whole is still continuously growing. I mean, your channel as itself is quite relatively new, and they're, like you said, there's so many different channels and they're all targeting different audiences, right? Whether it's just with entertainment form content of just how ants are in their natural setting, or of ant keeping as a whole, right? There's several ways that one can go about it.
So another thing that's interesting is the evolution of the nest, right? Or the formicarium, which used to just be an ant farm, but it's a lot more complicated than that now.
Definitely. I mean, huge props to Mac from Tar Heel Ants. I mean, without him, I wouldn't be where I'm at. I would not have the amount of colonies that I have right now. I would not even be thinking about perhaps starting an ant business, because I think in the terms of the barrier of entry previously was much, much higher. I mean, now you have the ability to just purchase a nest from Tar Heel Ants and move your ant colony into something like that. Obviously, there's other nest designs like the tub and tube setup, like with what you have behind you right now, that have allowed you to keep ants in a much more simpler setting. But yeah, no, we've definitely grown past. I mean, we've learned that the sort of Uncle Milton ant farm style is just not great for keeping ants. You know, ants need humidity gradients, they need heat gradients. Right. So I think all this stuff is definitely helping grow the ant hobby as well.
And things like Reddit too, where, you know, you can find a niche for anything, literally anything, no matter how oddly specific it is.
Ants themselves, that's definitely a niche topic, especially when you bring it up with other people.
So here's a question though. When you talk to people and you tell them that you keep ants, what are some of the reactions that you get?
I mean, I've heard all sorts of crazy things. I mean, the most common one I get is, ants? People keep ants? And I mean, I told them, you know, when I'm at the shows, I'm like, well, I'm here, right? If no one kept ants, I wouldn't be here, right? So,
right, yeah, you get the, why would you do that?
Yeah, I mean, what I tell people is ants are a visual pet. It's like a fish, right? You get to sit there and you can watch and get endless entertainment. I honestly would argue, after keeping fish myself for several years, that the ants give me personally more entertainment. I mean, the colonies grow. There's so many different little sets of behavior that you can watch. Watching the ants hunt. One of the things that makes me personally really passionate about keeping ants.
They're like gamified pets, because you start with the queen, then you got a worker, now you got 3 workers, now you got 10 workers, and then you keep growing, you watch them eat, you watch them hunt, and now they're at 100. Depending on the species, they can get really big, right?
I mean, you can get into the tens of thousands, right? And some species can get into the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, no thanks.
There's an ant for everyone. That's one thing, right? Like you said, there's ants that grow into the hundreds of thousands if that's what you're after. There's colonies that only stay at a couple hundred workers, right? So in terms of managing it, there's so many different species. I mean, Cole, me and you are both in California. I mean, we have over 200 species just in California alone. Literally in your backyard, there might be 10, 15 species. I mean, it takes time to go and look. But part of the reason why I started Atlantis is I wanted to give that platform to those people who potentially don't have the opportunity to have some of those cooler species, or some of the species that they're after, that perhaps they're after, you know, that they want. Like, I don't think you can really look at any other pet industry and pick out such a wide variety of different pets.
That's a good point you bring up too, of the different species. Is when I was first learning about ants, I was like, oh, all the cool exotic species like leafcutter ants and fire ants and stuff, they're all kind of in the tropics and not around here. I kind of live in a coastal desert, right? But then I started looking, and there's all kinds of fascinating species here. I was like, oh no, I live in like a hot spot. Because ants are so widespread, wherever you are, there's interesting species that you can have.
100%.
Speaking of catching ants, you've been really busy lately, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, last year alone, I mean, I drove around 40,000 miles traversing the desert, collecting ants. I mean, the last 2 weeks, I've been practically out every day. I think I've driven around 6,000 miles in the last month and a half.
Oh my gosh. So that's because like ant season is starting, right? There's like a lot of colonies that are starting to fly right now.
Right now we're having our first initial spring rains. I mean, our winter was kind of delayed here in California, but just recently it's been starting to heat up. I mean, we've been getting some rain. So in terms of our desert nesting species, they're all starting to kind of have their nuptial flights, and that's kind of what I've been doing is I've been going out doing scouting. The term that I like to use that a lot of people use is I've been anting, right? So yeah, I've been really, really busy just doing that. It's really fun, but really time consuming. It's one of the aspects of having an ant business.
That's awesome.
Well, actually, in fact, Cole, I mean, I'll just formally express this invitation to you now. I think in about a week or so, the conditions are going to be looking really ideal for some of the species of carpenter ant to start flying. So if you'd like to join me, perhaps next week we can do an episode on catching carpenter ants.
Oh, that's awesome. Yes. That sounds great. If the video's already posted, go ahead and check it out right here of Nami and I going catching carpenter ants.
Oh yeah, the anting season's just getting started. I mean, carpenter ants starting to fly. There's tons of honeypot ant species that are flying now. There's some species of Pogon myrmex that should start flying the next month and a half or so.
If that sounds interesting to you to start your own colony, this is a great time to do that. If you want to go out and try and catch your own ants, that's super fun and rewarding to kind of start with your own queen. Or check out Nami's site. He's got a lot of different species on there.
I have a nice selection up and available. And like I said, I'll be updating it as the season goes on. So like I said, I'm really excited to see how this year goes.
So Nami, you have a business selling ants. How many ant colonies do you have?
My business partner and I, Michael, we're managing around 3,000 ant colonies currently right now.
What?
Yeah, it's a lot of work. I'd tell you it's about 35 hours a week, almost a full-time job just feeding all the ant colonies. So if you entail that and then also going out collecting ants, going out scouting ants, finding new places to go catch ants, it's a big job, definitely.
You spend 35 hours a week
just feeding ants.
That's insane, dude.
Now, obviously, I think on a smaller scale, it definitely wouldn't take that long. If you're feeding your ants 2 to 3 times a week, really, it shouldn't take more than a few minutes. I mean, in terms of overall maintenance, it's not a lot, right? But when you have
when you have 3,000 ant colonies, it's a bit of work.
But yeah, no, definitely. It takes a long time. And, if people are interested, eventually we can get a nice ant tour going and show you guys kind of the behind the scenes of how I take care of my ants.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, leave a comment below if you want to see us do a tour of Nami's ant room with 3,000 colonies.
Yeah.
I've got my ant colonies right here. I've got the bulldozers. And these guys, I love these guys. They are so cool. And then got the Raiders of Arrakis, which they are really fun to watch eat. I just drop a cricket in there and they tear it apart. Well, hey, if you've made it to this point in the video, then that definitely means you're in our target audience range, and I am officially awarding you colony member status. You are part of the colony.
Welcome to the colony, my friend.
This show's kind of for you, so I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments of if there's topics that you want us to cover, questions that you have, things that you want us to talk about. This is your show. We'd really like to hear. I read every single comment that's posted, so go ahead and let us know what you want us to talk about next.
Welcome to the colony.
So Nami, a lot of people might say that ant keepers are just in it for the money or to get the ladies. Is that true?
I mean, you can look at me, I'm 35 hours deep into feeding ant colonies, right? I don't even have time for the ladies anymore. No, but yeah, I mean, your time, right? As a business, right? There's so much to do. And like I said, my personal goal is to grow this hobby. Not only just continue exploring my passion for ants and for nature, but I want to share it, right? You mentioned, the colony must grow.
The colony must grow.
Right? I want to kind of spread the love that I personally have with ant keeping with others. I want them to be able to have some form of appreciation for the little creatures that are just walking beneath their feet. I don't think everyone on this YouTube video is an ant keeper or perhaps even interested in keeping ants. But I think just having appreciation that such a thing exists, I think is still worth one's time.
Absolutely. And that's why I make videos about my ants, right? Is that, you can engage in their stories and stuff and watch them grow without having to do it yourself. But if you do want to get into that, it's a great hobby. So what are some common misconceptions about ant keeping, maybe for us common folk?
The biggest misconception is that, I think that, certain people aren't meant to keep ants, right? Or ant keeping is hard. And I think some of that stuff might have some truth to it, but I think at the end of the day, I think it's like any other hobby or any other pet. Once you kind of get an ant colony going and you have it on the right path, things tend to be pretty smooth sailing, right? So it's kind of like building that foundation, right? If you have got that foundation going, it's kind of like you'll be okay. I'm sure that you have your ups and downs with your ant colonies. Heck, I have. I mean, like I said, I have so many ant colonies. I see it on the weekly. I have some colonies that are doing exceptionally well. I have some colonies that die. And I think that's part of the thing with the ant keeping side, right? And so I think that might be one of the things that maybe might steer some people away is that, hey, well, my ant colony died. Why would I want to invest more time into doing this if this is what is going to continue happening to me? And I think that's just a small hurdle. I think eventually, once you pass that hurdle, and that's part of the reason why I sell ant colonies, is that hurdle is much more easily climbable, I guess you could say, right? So I think having patience, watching things unfold, providing consistent and adequate care, I think those are all really big key factors.
So there's kind of an education side to kind of do your homework before you get an ant colony. But then if you get an ant and it dies, don't be discouraged, because if you watch my videos, I feel like an ant dies in every episode and it's a learning curve, you know? So, but once you do get them going, they're pretty hardy.
It's like riding a bicycle. You know, when you first start learning how to ride a bicycle, you probably fall off a whole bunch of times. But then once you get going, it's like you're a professional, you know what I mean? And I think the same goes with the ant keeping side. So just be persistent, and the results will pay off. Overall, we're still learning. With ant keeping being so new as a hobby in of itself, I'm hoping through, starting the platform of Atlantis myself, I'm going to help and aid growing the ant keeping side of the hobby as well long term. But I'm really excited to be able to do this alongside you, Cole.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And I'm excited for what's next. And kind of as this channel grows, I'm excited to provide more of this. So again, let us know what you think. And Nami, I'm kind of excited to go catch carpenter ants next week.
Oh yeah, I am too. I'm real excited.
Oh, that's going to be fun. And if it's posted, watch this video next of me and Nami hunting carpenter ants.